This is G-Free Radio.
You remember that 80s song, ROCK in the USA? John Mellencamp, wasn't it? I don't know whether he was still a cougar at that stage. Well, here's another ROCK over in the land of the Star-Spangled Banner. It stands for Raising Our Celiac Kids. What a great name, what a great acronym. It's a nationwide movement to give support and education to young people with celiac disease, their parents and their families. And I caught up with Nikki Everett. She's from @GF Irresistibly, who's been running what they call the chapter in Charlotte, North Carolina. Great city if you get a chance to visit. I've been there.
ROCK stands for Raising Our Celiac Kids, and the first chapter was started in 1991 in California by Dana Korn, and she is an author of books, and she got interested because of her child, of course, having celiac disease. And when my child was diagnosed in 2008, I noticed that she was extremely angry and had a lot of resentment towards this diagnosis and the fact that she could not partake in what she used to eat. And I felt like the best way to resolve that anger was to actually charter one of the chapters of ROCK and start my own group where she could meet children who were just like herself.
And you came across the idea of ROCK, did you, just by doing that general research and finding out what help was out there?
I did. I had a background in support groups because of my mother, and she had started a support group when I was young. I did realize that support groups were very vital to acceptance and going through the grief process, which I feel it is a grief process when you get a diagnosis for celiac disease and have to change your diet. Any dietary change that's major in your life causes a grief process. So that's why I started doing research online and found Dana Korn and found the ROCK group. And there were only about 80 groups in the whole United States at that time. Now there are over 150. So it has grown quite a bit in just those few years.
Now, it's been a while since I did my psychology, but the grief process is denial and then why me and then slowly acceptance, isn't it?
Also anger, like she was stuck in. And a lot of people do get stuck in that anger mode. And they do fluctuate. So you can come to acceptance and then you'll be faced with a situation again and go right back into that same process. This is true of any major life change. So it is absolutely true of dietary change.
And Erin was 7 when she was diagnosed. So obviously she knew what was happening. She knew what ordinary food, as I like to say, rather than proper food, what ordinary food tasted like. So that was difficult for her more so than perhaps a toddler who is growing up with something from scratch, as it were.
Absolutely. The majority of children that I see that enter our group are around the 6 to 7 year age range. And that is because of the diagnosis rate and the length of time it takes to properly diagnose. I have seen that when children are younger and get diagnosed, their acceptance process is much quicker because they are dependent upon their parents to provide food for them rather than being faced with situations where food is present.
So we're talking about things for Erin when she was diagnosed at 7 and through to today when she's 12. It is food at ball games, isn't it, or at parties? I mean, it's sausage rolls and hot dogs and pizza and good, inverted commas, American fare.
Absolutely. And something that my husband mentioned, which I thought I would bring up, and maybe that explains it better for your audience. The American culture is very much based around children, especially holidays. Our holidays are much more intense in celebration as far as Halloween and things like that than in England.
And your husband is British, we should point out, yeah?
Yes, yeah. He is. He's from Liverpool. So it's interesting to him. He's watched that and noticed that and commented many times that we have a heavier cultural difference in celebrating holidays and basing them around parties for children. We also have a big predominant emphasis on sleepovers and cookouts and things like that. And so it does make it a little more difficult for the American child possibly than it would even an English child.
So talk me through one of those holiday celebrations. I'm thinking, of course, of Halloween and trick and treating. So you get a bucket, you're taking it door to door, but actually you know that a lot of the food that's being put in your bucket as a celiac, you're not going to be able to eat.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, my daughter was diagnosed right after a Halloween incident because we had gone out trick-or-treating and she had gorged on candy, and she spent the rest of the night, vomiting and in severe distress. And that was when I called the doctor the next morning and pushed for a endoscopy. Now, once she had gotten diagnosed, the way that we handled that was I sat down and had a whole session of explaining to her that, you're not going to be able to eat all of it. So I have to ask you to take only the candy that you can eat and eat that while we're out trick-or-treating. And then when we get home, we will go through it, take out all the candy that you can't have, and I will replace it with candy you can have. That was how we dealt with that whole situation in the beginning. That
sounds fantastic. So, and presumably you're bringing these kinds of coping mechanisms to the rock group, are you?
Absolutely. I share all the things that we do to try and positively deal with the issues at hand and deal with the emotions that come up, because there are a veritable multitude of emotions that come up for these children.
And they're able to swap their own ideas and their own thoughts and experiences as well, because life is ever changing, not just as you go through your own personal years, but as the years move on, different things come into culture, different opportunities arrive, just because the world is ever changing itself.
Absolutely. And we've seen a huge change. I mean, look at gluten-free now compared to 5 years ago when my daughter was diagnosed. At that time, I had to pretty much make everything from scratch. Now we have mixes. Now we have things that are ready bought. These have absolutely helped our whole situation.
But as those things improve, other things change as well in a negative way, don't they? The amount of other additives or GMOs or, inverted commas, rubbish food that is available almost everywhere, which is full of all sorts of unpleasant things that normally you would only read about perhaps on a list from the chemists.
This is how we started this process. As a matter of fact, in the beginning, my daughter was so angry that going shopping at a grocery store was a roller coaster ride of emotion. She would pick up a product and bring it to me, and I'd say, no, you can't have that. And then she would get angry at me. So the way that we switched that around was I started having her read the ingredient list. And when we would come to words that she could not read, of course, at 7, 8, 9 years old, I would say to her, do you really want to put that in your body? And then she would say, no, I don't, because I don't know what that is. And then I would say, okay, well, there you go. So it's not really a bad thing that you're not eating that. So, of course, along the way, these things have become more and more prevalent and we understand them better. And as far as GMOs and chemicals, yes, that has become an issue which in the American marketplace, people are, of course, making that change of saying, I don't want possibly these things in my food. But it is so widespread in our food chain that it's difficult to get out of. And yes, at the beginning, I was glad there wasn't taco seasoning in a packet with MSG. Now there is, and it's GF, gluten-free. So is that a good thing? Probably not.
And more from Nikki Everett next week with some more ideas and hints and tips and a way to cope with raising your celiac kid at GF Irresistibly, at GFAF Wellness. You can also contact her via there and follow her on Twitter, of course.